The billionaire stared at the money in the woman's trembling hand. Pound 620. He knew exactly what it was. Her rent. The strange part was that she knew nothing about him. She didn't know that the man standing in front of her in a faded grocery store uniform owned the entire supermarket chain. She didn't know he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. And she certainly didn't know that for the past 3 weeks, he had been secretly watching his employees to find out which of them could be trusted. But there she stood, a widow with tired eyes, holding out the last money she had. "Please," she whispered. "You look like you need it more than I do." The billionaire felt something inside him break, because just hours earlier, he had been convinced that money had made people cruel. Now a woman who barely had enough to survive was proving him wrong. But what happened next would expose something far darker inside his own company. Adrian Vale was 38 years old and the founder of Vale Mart, one of Britain's fastest-growing supermarket chains. His face appeared regularly in business magazines. He owned luxury properties, drove cars most people only saw in films, and had enough money to walk away from work forever. But Adrian had begun to hate what his company had become. Customers were complaining about rude staff. Employees were being bullied by managers, and worse, money was disappearing from several stores. Every time Adrian asked his executives what was happening, they gave him the same answer. It's the lower-level staff. They're careless. They're lazy. They're probably stealing. Adrian wasn't convinced, so he made a decision that shocked even his closest advisor. He would go undercover. He changed his appearance, rented a tiny flat, bought cheap clothes, and created a fake identity. Daniel Reed. A struggling man looking for work. His first job was at one of his own supermarkets in Birmingham. He was given a blue uniform, an employee number, and the lowest hourly wage in the building. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. Then Adrian started noticing things. Some employees were kind when managers were around but cruel when they weren't. One supervisor regularly embarrassed elderly customers. Another employee quietly took food from damaged stock boxes. And one manager had a habit that made Adrian particularly suspicious. Every Friday evening, large amounts of cash disappeared from the store's records. Yet nobody seemed willing to talk. Adrian began keeping notes, names, times, conversations. Until one rainy Thursday evening, a woman walked into the store carrying a small black handbag. She looked exhausted. Her coat was old. Her shoes were worn. She approached Adrian's checkout with only 3 items: bread, milk, and a small packet of children's cereal. Adrian scanned everything, pound 840. The woman searched through her purse, then she froze. She counted her coins twice. "Sorry," she said quietly. "Could you remove the cereal?" Adrian looked at her. "Of course." Removed it. She paid for the bread and milk and walked away. But Adrian noticed something strange. There was a photograph sticking out of her purse, a man wearing a wedding ring. Adrian didn't think much of it until she returned 5 minutes later. She was crying. "Excuse me," she said. "Yes. Do you know where the manager is?" Adrian pointed toward the office. "Why?" The woman swallowed. "I need my husband's money." Adrian frowned. "What do you mean?" She lowered her voice. "Husband worked for this company." That caught his attention. "What was his name?" She hesitated. "Thomas Bennett." Adrian's expression changed. He knew that name. Thomas Bennett had been a warehouse employee who died 18 months earlier after collapsing during a night shift. The company had paid a small settlement to his family. At least that's what Adrian had been told. "What happened?" Adrian asked. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Husband died believing this company was good." She looked toward the manager's office. "Someone stole the money they promised my family." Adrian's heart began pounding. "What money?" She pulled out a crumpled letter. "Husband's death benefit." According to the letter, the company had approved £18,000 for Thomas's widow and their daughter. But she had received only £2,000. She had spent months trying to find out what happened to the rest. Every person she contacted told her the paperwork had been lost. Then someone stopped answering her calls. "What's your name?" Adrian asked. Clara Bennett. Stared at her. This wasn't just a random customer. She was connected to the very mystery he had been investigating. Before he could ask another question, the store manager appeared. "Clara." His voice was cold. "You again?" Clara immediately looked frightened. "I just want to know where the rest of my husband's money went." Manager stepped closer. I've told you repeatedly, the company owes you nothing. Isn't true, you need to leave. Clara's voice trembled. Daughter hasn't eaten properly in 2 days. Manager shrugged. Not my problem. Adrian clenched his fists behind the counter, but Clara turned and walked away. Then something happened that Adrian would never forget. As she reached the door, she looked back at him. Their eyes met. She walked back to his checkout. She reached into her handbag and pulled out the $620. Adrian stared. What is that? My rent money. Immediately shook his head. No, I can't take that. She pushed it toward him. I heard you talking earlier. Adrian's stomach dropped. You said you were struggling. He had deliberately told his coworkers that he couldn't afford his rent. It was part of the undercover story. Clara smiled sadly. I know what it's like to be scared about losing your home. Please take it. Adrian pushed the money back. Mrs. Bennett, you need this. She shook her head. Maybe, but you're hungry. I can manage. So can I. She forced a tiny smile. That's what we tell ourselves, isn't it? Adrian couldn't speak. Then she whispered, my husband always helped people. I think he'd be angry with me if I walked away. She left. Adrian stood frozen. A billionaire had just been given someone's last $620 by pounds. A woman who had been cheated out of thousands of pounds by his own company. But Adrian was about to discover that the money Clara had just given him was connected to something much bigger. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. And stay with me, because what Adrian discovered next was far worse than he could have imagined. That night, Adrian didn't sleep. At 2:13 a.m., he called his head of security. Find everything on Thomas Bennett. Was silence. Then the security director replied, Sir, there's something you should know. Bennett's case was never closed. Adrian sat up. What do you mean? The original investigation showed that the £18,000 payment was approved. Then where did it go? Another pause. It was transferred into an internal employee account. Adrian's blood ran cold. Whose? The answer came quietly. The store manager's. Adrian immediately pulled up the manager's records. Then he saw something even worse. The same manager had received unexplained transfers connected to 6 other deceased or injured employees. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't incompetence. It was theft. And Adrian suddenly understood why nobody had been willing to speak. The manager wasn't working alone. The next morning, Adrian walked into the supermarket wearing his cheap uniform again. But this time, he wasn't there to observe. He walked straight into the manager's office. The manager looked up angrily. What do you want? Adrian placed the £620 on the desk. The manager stared at it. What's this? Clara Bennett's rent money. Man's face changed. Adrian leaned forward. She gave this to me because she thought I was poor. Then he smiled. I'm not. Manager frowned. What are you talking about? Adrian removed his employee badge, then his fake identity card, and finally he placed his real identification on the desk. The manager's face turned white. Adrian Vale. Yes. The billionaire looked directly into his eyes. You've been stealing from my employees. The manager began stammering, but Adrian wasn't finished. He had secretly recorded everything, every conversation, every transaction, every missing payment. And that afternoon, police arrived at the store. The manager was arrested. Several senior employees were suspended. And the investigation uncovered more than £100,000 that had been taken from vulnerable families. But Adrian remembered Clara, the widow who had been willing to lose her home to help a stranger. He personally returned every penny that had been stolen from her. Then he did something nobody expected. He offered Clara a job, not because he felt sorry for her, but because during his entire undercover operation, she had shown the exact qualities he had been searching for: honesty, courage, compassion, and integrity. Months later, Clara became the head of customer welfare for Vale Mart. And Adrian changed the company's policies completely. But he kept one thing in his office: the £620 Clara had tried to give him. He never spent it. Instead, he framed the money. And underneath it, he placed a small handwritten note. The woman who had almost nothing gave me everything I needed to know. Because Adrian had started his undercover mission believing he was testing his employees. He never expected that in the end, the poorest person in the store would be the one testing him. And now I want to hear from you. If you were Clara, would you have given your last rent money to a stranger who needed help? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories like this. Because sometimes, the person with the least money can have the richest heart.